This week on Mixed and Mastered, I am joined by an industry legend whose fingerprints are all over the past, present, and future of hip-hop and soul music, Faith Newman. Being one of the first 5 employees of Def Jam Records, her legacy includes discovering Nas, executive producing Illmatic, and signing Jamiroquai. Faith brings an unmatched insight into the art and business of music. Currently Executive VP of A&R and Catalog Development at Reservoir, Faith has signed iconic artists in their catalogs, from De La Soul to the Isley Brothers and Young Thug. Faith Newman is next on Mixed and Mastered. Welcome to Mixed and Mastered, the podcast where the stories of the music industry come to life. I'm Jeffrey Sledge, bringing you real conversations with the people who have shaped the sound of music. We're pulling back the curtain on what it takes to make it in the music business. These are the stories you won't hear anywhere else, told by the people who live them. This is Mixed and Mastered. Mixed and Mastered with an old homie and former neighbor. Yeah, a former neighbor of mine, Faith Newman.
Hi.
The legendary Faith Newman.
Thank you, Jeff.
When I was telling people that you were taping, people were like, "Oh shit, Faith Newman!" I'm like, "Yeah, I know Faith Newman. Oh, that's dope. She's dope."
Yeah, man. I've just been doing it a long time.
Yeah, we both have. My God.
I mean, I was talking to DJ Pooh last week. He was recalling, when they first, they brought them to New York to work with Todd, and
that's right.
They put them up in this apartment in Brooklyn, but they weren't really paying them anything. So we used to bring them like McDonald's and stuff. And he was like, I remember that, because we were like practically starving and you saved us. And I was like, Pooh, that was 1986. You do realize it's almost 40 years ago.
So. No, stop. We're going to talk about all that. I don't want to give it all away at the front, because you have you're one of the, well, not few, but I guess nowadays you're one of the people who has been around longer than me. You know what I'm saying? Yeah, I'm saying there's not many people left. Yeah, many people left that have been around longer than me. And I tell people how long I started in '89, and you were already rolling.
Yeah, '89. I was at Def Jam. Yeah,
you were rolling.
Yeah.
So let's start from the beginning. You're a Philly girl.
I'm a Philly girl.
Okay, real quick. What's your favorite cheesesteak place?
Pat's.
Okay.
Or no, you know what? It's really Jim's Steaks on South Street. I know that sounds really touristy or whatever, but I like Jim's Steaks.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And
So
then Pat's second.
You're a Philly girl, born and raised.
Yes, indeed.
And what was your first kind of, spark to get into the music
business? Well, it's funny. I have
not even music business, just music in general.
Music, yeah, no, because there was always music in my house. I mean, I'm talking like 3-4 years old, remembering my dad playing music on. They had one of those old reel-to-reel players, and he would play like Ray Charles and Janis Joplin and the Byrds and all kinds of really, actually soulful stuff, which I really gravitated towards, and so that. There's a picture on my wall behind me of me at 3, playing with a turntable and and a box of 45s. A little DJ action at 3 years old. I don't know. It just spoke to me somehow, and I would memorize lyrics. I was really good at that. So there's always music playing in the car, and I would like sing along and started collecting records, I guess, when I was about 7 years old, 8 years old. I remember my first album was with my dad in the mall, and we were walking past Woolworths. If you remember Woolworths.
Of course.
And there was Soul Train, The Hits That Made It Happen, was on display in front of Woolworths. And of course, I loved Soul Train. I used to, wake up every Saturday morning and like run to the TV to watch Soul Train. And I said to my dad, I want this one. He said, "Are you sure you want that one?" I said, "I want this one." And I still have it.
Wow, you still have that?
I still have it, and which is nice because I sold when my parents moved out of the house, I sold most of my vinyl.
Wow. I think my first vinyl was the Jackson 5 Christmas album. I think
That's a
that was
good
the
one.
first one. Yeah, I think that was my first
Yeah.
one. Yeah, I don't have it anymore,
Up
but
to
I have
that point, I had collected 45s, and then, like, so Soul Train album was my first album purchase, and then my
Wow.
second one was Kool and the Gang. Um, so I definitely had a preference for R&B. That was the
Yeah.
music that spoke to me. Those were the records that I was buying. And then if you fast forward to me, so I used to do also was like I had a book where I would like put all my records in with the corresponding number next to them and a
Wow.
number on the record so that I cataloged all my music, and that was like 8, 9 years old. So I guess if you fast forward to 14, because I don't want this to take up too much
Yeah, I got you. I got you.
time. I went to a concert, a group called the Cars, who I used to love.
Yeah, I remember the
They
Cars.
were playing at the Spectrum in Philadelphia, and my brother, who was 16 at the time, took me. And I remember being very excited because I loved the group, and I thought, I was their biggest fan and all this,
Mhm.
and I'm sitting in the Spectrum, and I'm like looking around like 20,000 people. I'm like, I don't like this shit. Like,
You didn't like to be general population.
no, exactly. I said, I want to be somebody who makes these things happen. That's what I want to do with my life.
Okay.
So that was at 14. So everything I did from that point on was pointed in that direction.
That's dope.
And when I was 16, I got an internship with Electric Factory Concerts in Philadelphia.
Okay.
And so I got to be backstage at a bunch of shows. And
How was that for like a 16-year-old girl to see all that was happening in the back?
it was wild. I mean, there was a lot of cocaine. Not that I
I know, but it was
partook
happening
in any of
around me.
that.
It was happening around
But I
me.
do very vividly Marvin Gaye's Sexual Healing Tour
Wow.
came to the Spectrum, and I did get to meet him briefly, and that was incredible. He was kind of high out of his mind, but it was still Marvin Gaye, so that was incredible. And
That's amazing.
yeah, and there's a funny story related to that, because Ashford and Simpson opened for him, and do you know who Jimmy Simpson is? Valerie's
No.
brother.
I know
Valerie's
but didn't
brother.
her other brother sing for when Village People, or was that I think
Oh, I don't
he
know.
was I think I think her brother was the lead singer for Village People, don't quote me.
Okay, it's very possible. Anyway, he kind of was pushed up on me a bit, and there's a longer story to it, but the story ends with him being at a party in Washington D.C. in a hotel room with like a bunch, 100 people, and then all of a sudden all the people leave, and then it's just the two of us, and he's like puts his hand on the door and says,
God.
yeah, and says, you want to be in the music business, you don't get something for nothing, like you're not going to just leave here without, it was like textbook, like something out of an after school special or something. And
Dun, dun, dun.
he dropped his hand, and I ran out the door and ran down the hall and left.
Oh my God. You've been
Crazy.
through it, boy. You've been through it.
And the perfect ending to that is that by 87, I was working for Def Jam, and I saw him remember that it was called 2020.
I don't remember
Ashford and
2020.
Simpson had a restaurant / club / yeah. Anyway, I saw him there, and I gave him my business card. I was like,
Wow.
yeah,
So you leave Philly, graduate high school, blah blah blah.
yeah,
Then
yeah.
you come to NYU.
Come to NYU.
And this isn't when the music because I read a piece on you and it brought back a lot of memories, and this was the time when the music business was in New York was pretty new, and there was a lot of small labels and people kind of moving around. And so how did you get to Def Jam because you came up to be a student?
Yes. I came up to be a student, but my goal was to be in the music industry. Like not as an intern, but full. And I started by. This is a weird story. Okay, so I modeled when I first came to New York.
Okay.
And some print work, advertising stuff, whatever. And I did a fashion show at Studio 54, which wasn't like it was in the old days, but they were still having events there.
Mm-hmm.
And this guy, my mom was there with me, and this guy comes up to me afterwards, and he's like, my name is Steve Pipitko. I'm a music attorney, because they had asked the girls who were in the show what they wanted to do with their life, and I said I want to be in the music business. So he said, if you ever have any questions or whatever, come to me, and I'll, and it wasn't like I didn't get a skeevy kind of vibe from him, which turned out to be correct because he never was, because we stayed friends for many years. He got me an internship at Select Records.
Wow, Fred Mineo.
Fred Mineo. So that was, Whistle, UTFO, Real Roxanne.
Was Kid and Play there at the time?
Not yet.
Okay, they went there yet. Okay.
Mm-hmm. This was like the summer of '86.
Okay.
I want to say.
Okay.
So I did that, and then Steve, and then it's just such weird stories. So like, I go to a party with Steve for Billy Ocean's platinum record party. It was a Jive Records party, and so Barry would have been there. I don't know if Clive would have been there.
Probably.
And that's where I met Gary Harris. And Gary Harris was like, we just started talking about music, and he was like, I don't even know, like, where do you come from? Like, I don't understand. Who are you? And he said, you should. I said, I'm looking, my internship at Select is ending. I'm looking to get another internship. And he suggested that I reach out to his friend at Columbia Records who was doing promotion at the time. So I got in late 86, I turned 21, and I had this big party, and Houdini was there, and Run DMC was there, and the Beastie Boys were there. It was pretty awesome.
Yeah.
And so I started an internship at Columbia Records, which was very enlightening.
And now who did you work under as
I worked under a woman named Gail Bruswitz, who did dance club promotion.
Okay. And just give me a little brief overview how you liked it.
I stuffed envelopes, and I kept my ears and my eyes open.
Yeah.
I mean, the company was run by, white men, and strictly, and women were relegated to assistants or PR.
Mm-hmm.
And Gail was the only woman in the promotion department. And so I can't even imagine what she had to deal with.
Yeah. Yeah. It was a different, when I left Wild Pitch and I went to Chrysalis Records, which was Billy Idol and Pat Benatar, and it was pretty much a rock label.
Yeah.
But it was the same thing. It was like white dudes. It was the same thing, rock and roll, like white dudes, and the women were assistants, and there was the woman in PR, and I still remember her name, Frances Pennington, because Frances actually was the guy from Tears for Fears' girlfriend.
Mm-hmm.
But it was the same energy. That was the record business back then. It was like
that was totally the record business back then, and I had to deal with getting hit on by the 40-something guys in the in the promo department, and because you got to think that those guys started out in the 70s, right? Because 86 is only 10 years apart from 76, and you could just that whatever was going on back then, they carried it through.
Exactly.
And Walter Yetnikoff had actually just left when I got there, so I'm sure that would have been interesting.
Yeah. So tell me how you get from that to now. Let me tell the people, because I don't know if you want to say this, but you were one of the first 5 employees of Def Jam Records.
That's correct.
That's insane.
That's
like insane. Literally insane. You were there. You were like Crush Groove or whatever. Like you were literally there at the beginning, like when all that,
Yeah.
you know, what they show in the movie, like in the from the
Right.
dorm room to the thing and all that. You were like literally there for all of that. So tell us about that.
So just to backtrack real quick, my internship was ending with Columbia, and on my last day of my internship, Gail took me in her office and said, do yourself a favor and get out of this business. It's no place for women. She was crying. I mean, this was
Wow.
she's like, they'll like eat you alive and, try to find something else to do with your life before you out.
Wow.
I'm like, I'm 20 years old, so
Yeah.
I'm like,
I'll be all right.
I'll be all right. Don't worry about me. I know what I'm doing.
I got this. I got this. Yeah.
So then like Steve came through again and he said, look, I have got you an interview with Charles Huggins at Hush Productions.
Wow.
Yeah.
Charles and Bo Huggins.
Charles and Bo Huggins. So I think it was to be an assistant to Hank Talbert.
I didn't know Hank. I didn't know Hank Talbert. No.
And so I did the interview. They wanted to hire me. The day before I was supposed to go back to meet Charles, I came home from class. I was still at NYU. Came home from class, and there's a note on the refrigerator that said Rick Rubin called.
Wow.
I said to my roommate, I was like, is this a joke? And he said, no, I don't think so. He said, it sounded for real. So I called the number slowly, and Rick, you know how he has that way of speaking. He's like, hello. Like, this is, Faith Newman, and, I know you called. He said, yep. We need some more people at Def Jam, and we want to hire you. Wow. I was like, okay.
Yeah, bet.
Okay, yeah, and he said, do you want to know how much you're going to make? I don't care. I'm like, I'll pay you.
Exactly.
I was broke, but I was like, I will pay you,
So what was out at that time?
My parents sent me $50 a week. That was like
was LL out at that time? Was the LL out at that time? Was that album out, the first album?
The first album, yeah.
Wow. And was the Beastie, but the Beasties, no.
The Beasties had just put out License to Ill.
Just, okay. Wow.
Yes.
Wow.
Yes.
It's crazy.
And Public Enemy.
The first album.
Wow. So it's funny. So he's like, well, come see me at the office and we can talk about what you're going to be doing and stuff. And so I go see him, and and he's like, I was talking, because I was also, club kid. So I was at Land Quarter, and I was at Union Square, and I was at Rooftop, and I was at all those places. And I used to go to Music Factory to get my records, and he was just like, where's I going with this? Yeah. Oh, yeah. So I said I was talking about like new hip hop stuff that was coming out. And he was like, yeah, I'm not really, I'm in a different place right now. I'm more into like rock stuff right now. So that's what, like, he like had already, like, he was such a visionary. I gotta say, I mean, this was early 87, and he was already like moving on to like Danzig and Slayer and all the stuff that he was doing at that time.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
So this was April of 87, and my first day at Def Jam was June 1st, 1987.
And who were the other 4 employees? Do you remember?
Sure. Yeah. Dave Funkenklein.
Yeah, Dave. That was my guy. That was my guy, man. Yeah. Loved him.
George Solmers.
I didn't know him.
Bill Stepney. Lindsey Williams.
Wow.
And Dawn Greco.
Okay, I didn't know her. Yeah. So I know 3 out of the 5. Okay. So how was it like starting a small label like that became, that obviously a
It was
Powerhouse.
amazing. I mean, we worked in a shitty little office, like on the second floor, 298 Elizabeth Street, which had no heat and no air conditioning. And I would like complain to Russell. I'm like, it's so cold in here. I don't know what to do. He's like, go home. That was so Russell. Yeah, it was, but it was like the time of my life. I gotta say, it
Yeah.
just, it was funny because people would come from around the world to Def Jam, and they would walk into our little office and be like, "Oh, this is it."
Yeah, right. Thinking it's gonna be some big old like conglomerate, you know?
Rush management on the ground floor was much more impressive than we did.
Wow.
But it was like we shared desks and phones. There weren't enough for everybody. Oh, did I mention George Solmers?
You did. I didn't know
I
him.
did. Okay. I just want to make sure
What did he do?
I mentioned George.
What did George do?
George did he did stuff with getting sponsorships from from Troop, from some skateboard company that I can't remember the name of.
Okay.
He did like that kind of stuff.
Cool.
And Dave Klein did promotion and marketing stuff.
So I'm thinking about my first experience at my first record company job.
Yeah.
Did you even know kind of what you were doing, or you just kind of doing shit?
You just kind of did whatever needed to be done. I
Exactly.
remember none of the artists had signed up with a PRO, so I took everybody on a field trip to ASCAP and got them all signed up.
So they didn't even know they had money out there because they were signed up.
Yeah, they were leaving money on the table. So
Wow.
that was one thing that I did, and yes,
Did that start Did that start your interest? I'm sorry, cut you off. Did that start your interest in publishing?
It actually did. It did. It did. It was funny. I mean, and the way you had to do things back then in terms of copyrights was like getting a cassette and getting a lyric sheet and mailing it to the Library of Congress. I mean, that's,
Wow.
So I remember like being with Flav, and I was doing Don't Believe the Hype, and I was typing out the lyrics, and he said, "No, gee, I can do it." And he like starts typing with like one finger. He was so great. Yeah.
Oh, wow. No, let me ask a question. What were some of your favorite records during that period from Def Jam and just in general? Do you remember?
Oh yeah, well, Slick Rick, Great Adventures. I mean, come on.
Yeah. I listened to that record the other day.
Yeah, it still holds up.
It holds up. Crazy.
And PE, Nation of Millions, just genius. And then later on, Third Base, like the Cactus album, which I love.
Of course.
LL, when he did I wasn't a huge fan of Panther, but I thought that Mama Said Knock You Out was like a game changer.
Yeah. I wasn't a fan of the Panther album, but there were a couple records on there. I just thought, like, I still remember that record Fast Peg. Yeah. There's a couple of the records there was a couple of records on there that was amazing,
Yeah.
but like as an album it was kind of, but then you look backwards and it was kind of visionary. The album wasn't great because he was working with West Coast people.
Right.
So he was kind of, pushing the line and doing it, doing things that people do now, like take for granted. He was doing that back then,
Right. And Marley turned everything around. So
yeah,
which is great because I did a deal with him here, so it's all like full circle.
Full circle. I'm sure you got a lot of full circles.
I got a lot of full circle moments.
Give me one before we move to Columbia and Nas and everything. Give me one crazy Def Jam story. Yeah, I know you got a billion of them, but give me one that doesn't incriminate anybody or something like that. But
oh man, I might have to come back to you on that.
Okay, we could do it after. We could do it later.
Yeah, I'll come back to you. I'm trying to think. There's so many.
Okay, fine.
Yeah.
Fine. So as Def Jam started to grow, like what was that like watching, this company that you started? You said 5 people and you guys had no air and no heat and it's cold and there's probably mice in there and all kind of shit.
Yeah,
to grow into like becoming what become a legit powerhouse record label? What was that like?
For me, I'm a purist, and I felt like what happened is that Rick left, as you know.
Mm-hmm.
He just moved. He just said to me he was going to LA one day, and he never came back. And so Russell was much more interested in starting a modeling agency and talking about a clothing line at that point. And there was this power vacuum there at Def Jam, and that's when Lior stepped in.
Okay.
And that was difficult for me because we had the Rush Associated Labels situation, which everybody was getting the label. You want a label, you want a label, you want a label. And slapping the Def Jam logo on it. And I thought that it was, diluting the label. Because if you went to Music Factory, or you went to Tower Records, or you went wherever, if you saw a Def Jam label, you bought it
immediately.
And that wasn't the case anymore. And I felt like we were becoming too big and too unwieldy. And that was kind of like, and when I made the decision to,
Yeah, I remember that era because that's kind of when I started. I mean, it was like, everybody got a label, and it was like bitches with problems, and it was like all these kind of small, kind of, or the afros and all this kind of stuff, and it was cool, but it wasn't like, where's the heat? The heat,
right? It wasn't Def Jam.
It wasn't Def Jam anymore.
Right.
So after you leave Def Jam, where do you go next?
Columbia Records, right back to Columbia.
Full circle.
Not as an intern this time, but as an A&R person.
Tell us about that.
It basically, like, Lior and I famously just
not hard, respectfully, not hard to do with him.
No. And I just, one day, he accused my assistant of losing a cassette that was supposed to go to Todd, to LL in Los Angeles. And it wasn't her fault. And he's screaming at me, and I just get quiet, And also, just for context, I mean, I used to go to Columbia's A&R meetings as a representative of Def Jam.
Okay.
So I would go to their confabs that they had, and they had a conference out in Montauk that I went to and stuff like that. So I was already kind of in the mix with Columbia. And Donnie Einer, who is the president of Columbia Records, basically told me, if you ever change your mind about being at Def Jam, just give me a call. So I gave him a call.
Just like that.
Yeah,
and for the people who don't know, Def Jam, before they went to the Universal system, Def Jam was distributed by Columbia Records.
That's correct.
So
yes.
some people might not know that. So
Yes.
okay, so you give Danny a call. He says, "Come on board."
Come on board.
A&R gig, and tells you to go do your thing. What was your first signing?
Nas.
Nas was the first signing. Okay, I didn't know if you had signed anybody before Nas. I didn't know if because I didn't know.
Yeah, no, I literally signed Nas 2 weeks into being at Columbia Records.
Oh, wow. I didn't realize it was that quick.
And we'll be right back. Ready to launch your podcast? Merrick Studios offers comprehensive services, from concept development and seamless production to strategic marketing and monetization. Let your story take the mic. Visit merrickcreative.com/studios and let's get to work.
Master the art of lyricism with Pendulum Inc., the first school for rap. Learn elite techniques through immersive lessons, real-world exercises, and guidance from hip-hop icons. This is where MCs sharpen their skills and glow boldly on the mic. Ready to level up? Visit penduluminc.com and start your journey today.
And now, back to our show.
Wow, so tell us the Nas saga.
The Nas saga started when I was still at Def Jam, and I had heard him, like everybody else, in Live at the Barbecue, and flipped out, like, who is this kid, and what the fuck, and
slapboxing with Jesus.
Go to hell for snuffing Jesus. He said that, so I wanted to connect with him. So I knew Large Professor, and Large was like, wanted me to talk to Akinelli first. Like he felt like maybe Nas wasn't ready. And long story, he did bring Paul Large, and Nas came to see me at Def Jam, but I had already left.
Sorry, not to cut you off, sorry, but you are the only other person I know that calls Large Paul besides me.
Really?
I call him Paul. I've never called him Large Professor in my life.
I know. I call him Paul.
Call him, yeah, Paul, yeah. So you had left Columbia.
He is like a sweetheart of a man.
He's a great dude. Great dude.
Yep. So I wasn't at Def Jam. So anyway, he ended up doing the Back to the Groove with Search. And so I remember and then I'm talking to Tragedy, who's in Queensbridge. I'm like, can you bring me to meet this kid, Nasty Nas? Somehow it just never, I went to Queensbridge, it just never happened. And so all this was swirling around. And one day Search comes to my office and he says, the kid you've been looking for, I got his demo right here.
Wow.
And I said, just wait here, don't go anywhere.
Yeah, stay right here.
Stay right here. And I went down the hall to the head of A&R, who's David Kahn, really great guy. And I said to him, I know you may not know what this is, but if you don't let me sign anything the entire time I work here, you have to let me sign this guy. And he said, okay. And I told Search that it was in the evening, and I told him that evening, we're going to do the deal.
Wow.
Yeah.
So there was no battle. There was no war for Nas.
There were other people I know. Was it Wild Pitch?
Maybe because remember, Main Source was on Wild Pitch, so it probably
exactly. So I know that he was talking to Wild Pitch, but it's interesting that Nas I remember from our first meeting, he being at Columbia Records and seeing the people on the wall, the famous, people from the turn of the century to through the 20s, the 30s, the 40s, that really impressed him.
Really?
Yeah. He said that before, that he was just I didn't think he noticed, but he noticed. And, he's such an old soul. It's
he wanted to be one of the greats.
He wanted to be one of the greats.
Wow.
So it all made sense. And we had a really funny first meeting. He was, he had his hoodie on and a bubble goose, and he was had his head down, and he wasn't really, he was kind of talking a little, but not a lot. And then he raised his head and he was like, so you're like the woman Wild style. I was like, no, yes, no.
Kinda.
I'd like to think not, and then he laughed, and that's what broke the ice, and it was, it was a long haul. It took 2.5 years to make Illmatic, so
I wanted to talk about that because it's so funny, again, you started before me, but kind of being in that same kind of era, there's so many. Now we're talking about this stuff, which I don't know we talked about before. It's so many things that we were right around each other, not knowing. Example, I wanted to sign Tragedy.
Oh.
You know what I'm saying? And I remember I got Tragedy's demo, and I called him and there was this other guy on the tape. Was a tape, and I was like, "Who's the other guy though? He's kind of nice." And he was like, "That's my man Nori." Nori was on his demo, so it's all these things, and so it's kind of all these Wild Pitch. I worked at Wild
lines.
Yeah, I worked at Wild Pitch, and so it's kind of all these things coming together. So I'm saying that to say, when you were in the process of making Illmatic, I was working at Jive with Q-Tip.
Wow.
So I was hearing a lot about it. I wasn't hearing it, but I was hearing about it.
Right.
And he was telling me about the process. And again, I had my first job, my first group I worked with was Gangstar, so I knew Premier. So and then LES used to get his hair cut uptown. So it's all these things, it's all these kind of things that we were having these parallel movements. So Q-Tip would tell us about Nas and how dope Nas was and how great this album was going to be.
Yeah.
And so tell me about the process of making that record, because again, there's only 9.
It thrilled you did? Yeah, well, we did it out of necessity because it was leaked. The album was so out there already that we didn't have a choice but to get it out commercially, and because honestly, we would have probably done 2 more songs.
Interesting. I didn't know that.
Oh, yeah, it was everywhere. It was like worldwide leakage. It's why it
Wow.
didn't, it took forever just to go gold. I mean, so many people had the record.
I did not know. I didn't remember that. Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So the process of making that, how did you decide, to work with Q-Tip and Pete Rock and Premier and
That was
LES?
all Nas. Nas said, "I want the best of every New York producer." That was him.
That was, so he
100%.
pulled that together.
Yes. At
Wow.
18
Was anybody?
years old or whatever he was at the time.
Were people resistant because he was so young and new, or they believed in his talent?
No, all they had to do was like hear him and be like, okay, I did have an incident where they were asking me to drop him from the label.
Really? Tell us about that.
Yes. When he put out Halftime, he had his first show at a place called Muse.
I remember Muse.
Yeah. And it's funny because I didn't know this 2 years later, but what I was told at the time was that Jungle, his brother, left a gun in the Grand Car Service car that I had called them.
Grand Car Service. Wow.
Grand Car Service to pick them up in Queensbridge and bring them to Muse.
Uh-huh.
And so apparently the driver found the gun and went to the police, and it was like a whole thing. And Jungle called up the precinct and screamed on them that he wanted his gun back. I mean, it was, and then
everybody illegal gun back.
And then he's like calling people at the label at Columbia Records, not me, but some other people, and threatening them and just going off on them. And, Donnie Einer called me to his office and he was like, I can't have this shit. Like, I can't, this isn't how we operate. And I was like, well, where do you think he comes from?
Yeah.
He doesn't come from where you come from or I come from.
It's a foreign land to him.
Yeah. And because he was like, Donnie was like, I'm not going to have this. Like, I'm going to drop it for the label kind of thing.
Wow.
And I just had to go in there and state my case. And the PS to all of this is that about 2 years ago, I was talking to Jungle and he was like, no. I asked the driver to hold it for me.
No, I just want him to hold it. I'll get to him later.
Like, could you hold this for me while I go in the club real quick?
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
So you work on this record. You said 2.5 years it took.
2
years or so. And when it drops, what's the response, the critical response to it?
Oh, critical response was insane. I mean, the first 5 mics in the source and, people just talking about him like he's like the Messiah, I mean, how does somebody so young create lyrics like that? It's just astounding. I mean, to this day, like I listen to New York State of Mind and get like chills. I mean,
yeah.
Where do
you think that was coming from? Like I said, as a kid, it was 18 or so at the time. Like, how was he able to do that?
Well, he was really, really, really well read, and he was in a musical family, because of his father.
Mm-hmm.
His mother stressed education. Like Nas will just say, he always had all these books in the house on a million different topics and would read them, and he was special. He is special.
Well, he is special. Yeah. So you have the success from that,
especially over 50 years old now. So
yeah, exactly. But now he's turned into like a venture capitalist, which is incredible.
Yeah, he is that. He's that as well.
Yeah.
And I want to say, because this was like, I guess last year, or the year before, there was an event, and I went to the event at Photographiska, whatever it's called. Jungle and Snacks and these other guys were all hanging out like outside, and they were like, "Thank you, Faith, you saved our lives." I was like,
"You did?"
That shit like hit me hard, and I started crying.
I bet. Yeah. That shit's real though. Like, if it wasn't for this, there weren't many options
No.
for them. Places
No,
for them
and
to go.
they lost. I mean, a lot of if you look at the album artwork, the picture of the guys sitting on the park bench are either all dead or in jail.
Damn.
Like I like every single one.
Damn.
Yeah.
Damn.
Yeah.
So you have this amazing success with Nas, and I didn't know this. I read this. So you worked with Jamiroquai next.
I signed Jamiroquai. Yeah.
I didn't know that.
I know a lot of people don't know that, but
So yeah, tell us about that.
It's pretty simple, really. I was friends with somebody who was friends with this guy, Kieran Hurley from Acid Jazz Records. She asked if Kieran could come see me at Columbia, and so he came to see me. He had a 1-song demo of this song, When You Gonna Learn? And I thought it was a woman singing. I couldn't tell, but something just struck me about it, and I was just like, he is incredible. I have to know more. And I told David, and I said, look, I'm going to go to London. It was a week before Christmas. I said, I'm going to go to London to meet him because this, just this off of this one song. And I went to London and I met him, and I met the other people, Eddie Pillar from Acid Jazz. And so Acid Jazz wanted to do like a label situation with Columbia, and we didn't end up doing that. But I think why people don't know that I signed him when I did was because it was a British act. And so Tommy and Donnie decided it needed to be signed through the UK office. And so with this guy, Lincoln, did you know Lincoln Elias?
No.
He was A&R at Soho Squared, which was Sony's London,
Okay.
I mean, Eddie wrote about me in his book, and that anybody from Jamiroquai will tell you that,
you did it.
I was there. It kind of got overshadowed by
the UK.
UK office, yeah.
Yeah, because I fell for it. I thought it came out of the UK. I had no idea you were involved in it.
No, it's all, and you know what's really funny is like Lincoln and I got into it once. He was in New York, and he's like, well, maybe you just want the kudos. I'm like, damn right I do.
Yeah. What else besides getting played, what else you got?
I was in your backyard, and you didn't, I met with Acid Jazz, which was like 5 minutes from Sony's office, so.
Wow.
What are you going to do?
So you leave. So what made you decide to leave Columbia?
What made me decide to leave Columbia? That's a good question. I felt like I wanted to go back to a smaller label again. Like I was missing like the Def Jam days. And I was kind of disillusioned with the whole Sony system, and I wanted to go back to a smaller label again.
Okay. And so where did you go after that?
Jive Records.
Jive Records, where we worked together.
We did.
Yeah, and tell me about your Jive experience.
It was tough, Jeff. I mean, I came in as Britney, Backstreet Boys, and NSYNC were exploding.
Yep.
And, groups like UGK or people like E40 or Spice One or
Too Short,
Mystical. Like, I think they all felt overlooked. Would you agree with that?
I agree with that 100%. No, 100%. I mean, like you said, obviously I had been there before you, and so we had those artists and Tribe and blah blah blah, KRS, and and they literally built the company brick by brick.
Yeah.
And then Clive Calder, who's a genius, and I'm not saying
he's a genius, yes, absolutely.
To be disrespectful at all, but he decided he had a long-term plan of selling the company, which we didn't know about, and so he decided to shift and go pop. He signed the Backstreet Boys, who were initially on Mercury Records, and he picked them up, and then they fucking exploded, and then he signed, I think NSYNC was next. They actually were on RCA Records at first. A lot of people don't remember that. And he got them, and obviously they exploded. And he found this girl from Louisiana named Britney Spears, and then she exploded. And all of a sudden, money is like literally raining down. it's so much money from those acts coming in.
Yeah.
So much money. It was unbelievable that the acts that we mentioned just now definitely felt overlooked and were being overlooked. I remember being in those meetings, the marketing meetings, and if somebody went like gold, it was like next. Like it was like only gold, like because people were selling 10 million albums. So like it became a thing with like selling 600,000 albums, which is a lot, which is a good money, a way to really build and hold up a record company and pay salaries. Not 15 million, So yeah, so it was.
Exactly.
It was
So you already know what the story was there. My timing was not good. I do remember one funny story is Barry telling me I had to go to Houston to get UGK's album or to listen to their, and fucking Jay Prince was in the hotel, like stationed somebody in the parking lot of the hotel to like follow me.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I know it right. It sounds right?
No, that's
yeah. But I do remember having dinner with Chad and Mama West and them taking me to a very fancy steakhouse.
Okay.
For dinner.
Okay.
Yeah.
So let me ask you a question. I don't think I've ever asked you this. How was it being this, white girl from Philly who was totally entrenched in Black music, like legitimately? It wasn't like you weren't doing as a fan. Like this is who you really are. I know you to know this is who you are. So it's sincere. But how was that? We're dealing with maybe your white counterparts, your Black. How was that?
Yeah, it's funny, Jeff, and I could be, maybe I'm naive, but I never really had an issue. I never had somebody call me out and say, you don't know because you're a white girl. I mean, I had like Nas's jokey joke about me. That was funny, but I think, because I was there early on, because I was, you could find me at the Latin Quarter,
Yeah.
I mean,
in it for real.
I just, I don't know. I mean, I don't know what people said behind my back, obviously, but to my face, I never really got into it with anybody,
Good.
Yeah.
Good. I think it's because people could sense immediately that it's sincere, right?
Yes.
And your love for Black music is real. It's not like just a kind of fly by night thing. And because you never really left,
Yeah.
You never really doing, I'm gonna go work at, with some pop rock label now and do this. Like you never really left the culture and music. You're true to it. And I think people could see that. It's like, okay, she might have, I don't know, but you might have opportunities to do other things, but you was like, nah, this is my shit. And I'm gonna do what I could do with my shit and help people and stuff, which we're gonna get to next.
And by doing publishing deals that I've done with the Isley Brothers, with say Confunction, with Willie Mitchell, with Birdie and White, with the Commodores, that's like my heart right there. So I've been able to have great dialogue with them, be extra fair with them, because they're at a time in their life when they really would like to just cash out, But to make sure they understand exactly what that means, I've just continued to kind of do that.
Yeah. I want to get into that. We're going to get to that next, but I wonder, talking to you, I just remember, I know you remember, I was going to say, do you remember you threw this great birthday party?
Yeah.
In the hotel. It was, because I remember Dan Charnas was there. Was it the New York hotel?
I had a birthday party?
I believe you had a birthday party. Maybe, how many years ago now?
I used to have great birthday parties, but like my 21st was epic. So was
I wasn't there. That was before me. But I don't think I'm getting mixed because I met this girl named Baby Blue there.
Oh, that party!
You remember? Yeah, there you go.
Yes.
Yes.
That was 2013.
Yes. That was a great party, man.
That was a great fucking party.
You had it at the top of this hotel in this dope ass suite.
No, I didn't pay
and
for
shit.
it. I didn't pay a dime for that whole thing.
That's unbelievable. That was a great party.
They wanted, 2 Chainz came. They wanted celebrities in there, and so it was like a promotion for them.
Exactly.
For me to have that party.
That was a good party. That was a good party. So tell us about Reservoir and what you've done and what you're doing now, because this is a really interesting. You were like we were talking before the show, and I said that you were really ahead of the curve with what you started at Reservoir and what's happening now with, like you said, setting artists and producers up to maybe cash out on their catalog. And people weren't really doing that when you first started.
No, they weren't. We were really early. I started at Reservoir in 2011. So it's been 14 years.
Wow.
And, I don't know how, I knew that there was something about catalogs of old stuff that was worth a lot.
Mm-hmm.
But it also had to be equitable to the people who were selling. That was my thing. So the first deal that I did was for a record label called Philly Groove.
Okay.
And the biggest artists on that label were the Delphonics and First Choice.
Wow.
So I got to know the Hart brothers when William was still alive, Wilbert. And we made them whole because the original deal, we had copies of the original contracts, and they were just like,
I'm sure they were terrible.
Terrible. The royalty rates, just awful.
Yeah.
And we wanted to make it right with them, and we redid the deal with Wilbert going forward. And so that was the first thing I signed actually was 2 Chainz in 2012, and that was before he dropped his first album.
Wow.
Not Player Circle, this was like he had put out the 3 mixtapes.
Mm-hmm. True and all that stuff.
Yeah, exactly. And then it was really funny because it was like a lot of people were vying to sign him, and I talked to his manager, to this guy, Coach Tech, and he's like, well, he wants to meet you. And I said, great. So we went to meet him, and we're standing outside the hotel just talking, and he's like, you signed Nas, right?
Wow.
2 Chainz signed it? And I'm like, really? He's like, he's my favorite. I want to sign with you. I'm like, cool.
Wow.
So that's how that happened.
That's amazing.
And then, I've done a lot of deals with Philly writers, Norman Harris, Alan Felder. Like I said, we did a big deal with the Isley Brothers. So, and I'm close with Ron now, which is like a dream come true for me,
Wow.
And he's still doing it.
Yeah. Yeah, he's still rolling.
He's got a young wife, so that keeps him, yeah.
I'm sure it helps.
Yeah. But, I've signed just a ton of stuff here, from artists. I like doing the catalog deals a lot.
Why is that?
I like preserving the history. I think it's important.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's important that the music continue to live on,
Yeah.
One of my favorite deals that I did was with Willie Mitchell.
Wow. Drake's is that Drake's uncle? No. Like Graham is Drake's uncle. Willie Mitchell did all the Al Green stuff.
Yeah, Willie Mitchell wrote all the Al Green, great Al Green stuff. So, just knowing that we have these things here is, and all is really amazing.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
You're doing good work.
I think so. I think I am, and we'll continue to. The space has gotten very crowded.
Very.
I was supposed to go see. Can I say who I was supposed to go see? I guess I can. I was on my way to see George Benson in Scottsdale, Arizona.
Okay.
The day before he's supposed to leave, you're like, he signed a deal with Harbor View.
Wow.
There's a lot of players right now. You have to really, really, really be on top of it.
Yeah.
And ready to like really open the checkbook, because there's a lot of players right now.
But I mean, I don't have to tell you this. I think one of your advantages will be some of those rappers from the 80s and the 90s because of your relationships. Because those guys are stuff is reverting back and everything.
Did a deal with Marley, so that was.
Yeah. See, that's stuff.
Did a deal with KG.
Yep. Oh, that was a good one.
Yeah.
Because KG stuff, like he is absolutely one of the most underrated producers ever. I'm like, this dude has done so much stuff that still plays. Like I heard Naughty on a commercial yesterday, like all the time. I'm like, but nobody ever talks about him as one of the greats. I'm like, dude, this guy was doing hard body rap hits and R&B hits.
And R&B stuff. Jeanne, I mean, come on.
Puffy Brown and Next and like he's a Jaheim.
Yeah.
He's incredible.
And he's a hell of a nice guy.
Yeah,
he's also important to me because I can't deal with. I have a no asshole policy. I can't.
I respect that.
I can't. I just don't. I've been doing it too long, and I just don't have the patience.
Yeah, the patience. Yeah.
You know, I mean, there's some rappers that I've signed that can be difficult, but it's also about the people that are around them. You know, managers and lawyers and stuff like that to keep. You know, so
yeah.
Cool.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Faith Newman.
Thank you, Sledge.
I really appreciate this.
Of course. I was happy to do it.
You can catch Mixed and Mastered on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeart, or wherever you get your podcasts. Hit that follow button, leave a review, and tell a friend. I'm your host, Jeffrey Sledge. Mixed and Mastered is produced and distributed by Merrick Studios.